everyone. I'm Abigail. This is Bentley, and welcome to another Two Kids interview. Today, we are joined by award-winning middle grade and young adult author Erin Bow. Ms. Bow's books include Plain Kate, The Swan Riders, Stand on the Sky, Sorrow's Knot, The Scorpion Rules, and of course, her amazing book that came out in the beginning of this year, Simon Sort of Says. Thank you for being with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Before you started writing novels, you were a poet and still are.
Mhm.
What do you love about poetry?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have always liked poetry. I've read poetry since I was about your age and have always really liked the way it captures something big and powerful about the world in a very small package. It's almost like if novels are like a place you can walk into, like a building you can walk into, poetry is like a medicine you can take. It's small enough to get inside you and change you from the inside out. And so I'm really in awe of that power and kind of like to capture little pieces of it.
It seems you've made a transition in your writing. You've been doing adult fantasy and sci-fi, and now you have moved over to middle grade, which we appreciate very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
What do you enjoy most about writing for each age group?
I sort of like to change every project that I do and give myself something new to do because otherwise I think I'd get bored. Also, I always joke with my agent that it's a way of being very bad for my career because people can't follow me from book to book and know what to expect. I like writing for and about young people because, well, first of all, because I just really like young people. And I hope that most authors who write for middle graders like middle grade kids, and most authors who write for teenagers like teenagers. Um, there's a real emotional honesty in writing for kids. I have two teenage kids, and people say they're dramatic, and they kind of mean it as an insult, like, oh, stop being so dramatic. But that's not true. Like, their feelings really are big. Things that seem ordinary to grown-ups, they're dealing with for the first time. And they have really big, important emotions about them because they're making really big, important decisions for the first time and figuring out who they are. And so I like writing stories that can do that too. Stories that can also be really big and about the first time people have something. So finding out who you are in your family and finding out who you are in the world.
Can you tell us about a time when you were doing something and you noticed someone or something and thought, I need to put that in a book?
Do you think I probably walk around stealing things and putting them in books? Yeah, maybe. I don't want to make people too scared about encountering authors in the wild, but yeah, I don't take whole people and put them in books. Like none of the people that I write about are very much like the people that I know. There are a couple of little exceptions here and there. Agate in Simon Sort of Says has a lot in common with my daughter, Eleanor. They are the same age. They look kind of the same. They're both autistic and they're both kind of amazing. But most of the time I don't steal people, I steal little moments. I remember, for example, being in Mongolia when I was writing Stand on the Sky. Stand on the Sky is set in Mongolia with Kazakh nomads. And every time I learned something new, I could see how it might fit into a book and inform a book. And so like I didn't steal the people that I met, but I remember once like watching the matriarch of the family that I was living with, her name was Jabik, like turning upside down and brushing out her long black hair and sort of pouring it into her headscarf and winding it up and tying it for the day. And I went, oh, well, that needs to go in a book. So those little gestures that make people real and make people pop off the page, I'm always watching for them.
Where did the idea for Simon Sort of Says come from?
Well, that's a complicated question. Before I was a writer, I used to be a physicist. And I'm the kind of physicist called a particle physicist, which means we smash two particles together or we smash a particle into a target. And there's a great spray of energy, a great tiny firework of energy that recreates the conditions of the Big Bang and creates new kinds of particles. And so we smash two things together to create something new. And I found that all of my book ideas are like that too. They're more than one idea hitting some other idea head on. So for Simon Sort of Says, it's Simon's family runs a funeral home and it's a funny book. And I had a comedy set in a funeral home kind of playing at the back of my mind for a while, but I couldn't really make it go. it was originally kind of a fantastic book. It had like a talking raven in it and stuff. And then one day I read an article about a place called the National Quiet Zone, which is a real place. It's in Virginia. There's a giant radio telescope there. And because there's a giant radio telescope there, people can't have cell phones. So it's offline in a way that most of America and most of Canada aren't. And I thought it would be really interesting to have a kid who moved to a place like that was completely offline, and a kid who was maybe happy about it because it gave him a chance to tell new stories about himself. And I took that idea and I combined it with the funeral home and a couple of other things that had just happened to me, and it just popped into life like that. So the idea came from like 4 or 5 different directions at once, all hitting each other together and creating something brand new.
What is the most meaningful interaction you've had when talking to a student during a school visit?
Oh, during a school visit. There are a lot. I was just at a school yesterday. I was just at Echo Cathedral in Kingston, Ontario, and there were a group of kids who came up to me after the class and were talking to me about writing and being writers. And I told them that I started writing as a fan fiction writer, and they were all fan fiction writers, and they decided they were going to form a writing club. So that was pretty incredible to see that. I often meet young writers. But I think the most meaningful interaction I've had with Simon Sort of Says particularly is with kids. Simon is healing from a trauma, as you guys know. I think you've dug into this a little bit. And I met another kid who was also healing from a trauma, and they told me that they used all the things that Simon does in the book. Like, he counts his breathing, and he uses a grounding exercise called 5 senses, where you name the 5 things you can see and then the 4 things you can hear. And so they were using these exercises in their day-to-day life, and they said it had really made a difference. And I cried and they cried, because trauma is actually really common in young people, but it's not something we talk too much about. So watching people heal and knowing that your book makes a small difference in that is really amazing.
We actually have that kind of writing club. We have interviewed a number of authors who've had a book banned in certain places. That means in those places, kids don't have the same access to books that we have and may not be able to see themselves represented in books. Can you give us your thoughts on this?
My books have not been outright banned. My books have been occasionally what's called shadow banned, which means they're not on the shelf, but no one tells anyone that, right? They're just some teacher or some librarian or some school board makes a decision that it would just be easier just not to put them on a shelf and not have to explain why they're not there, which happens a lot. I think it's heartbreaking. It's really difficult. Like, here in my community, I'm in Waterloo, Ontario. There's a Kids' Choice Book Award called they're called the Forest of Reading Awards. And so librarians make a list of like 10 books that they think kids will really like, and then the kids read them and they vote for their favorite, and then the author wins an award. It's a really big deal where we're from. And there's a local school board that's decided some of the kids shouldn't get to read some of the books because there are LGBTQ characters in them. And I think that's heartbreaking. It tells kids who might like have 2 moms or might themselves like be wondering about their gender or their sexuality that it's not okay to talk about, and it's not okay to have stories about it. And for kids who have never occurred to them, it shuts down the conversation. It makes it feel shameful. It makes it so that there's only one voice in the world. And I think that's ultimately will make us all much, much poorer. But in the short term, it makes vulnerable people far more vulnerable. And as a writer, it's abhorrent and it's heartbreaking.
Awards, there is a lot of buzz around Simon Sort of Says and possible Newbery. We both were.
Teach me how to do it, Abigail. Like this?
Do you like to think about that? Try not to think about it at all? What is your award thinking philosophy?
I like in general to get my hopes up. I think I think if you don't take the chance to get your hopes up, you don't have the fun of getting your hopes up. Like Simon Sort of Says was recently longlisted for a big award in the United States called the National Book Award. So there are 10 books on the long list, and then there are 5 books on the short list. And if you make the short list, you get to go to this big party. It's like in New York City, and you have to get like a ball gown or a tuxedo or something. And I just went right ahead and got my hopes up. I'm like, why not like shop online for ball gowns and get excited and talk to everybody about how excited I am and order all 10 books on the list and read them all and get to meet the authors. And then it didn't make the short list. It was on the long list, but it didn't make the short list. And I was sad for a day or two. But in the end, I was thrilled that I had been on the long list and that I had looked at ball gowns. It was so much fun. It was such an honor to be on the long list. And so I'm trying to have that attitude. I'm trying to have the attitude of, oh, it's fun to imagine it. It's fun to think that someday that could happen to this book or one of my books, that it might reach readers and kids that way. I try not to count on it because all awards, you never know. So I don't make big plans for, I don't quit my job and go, when I win the Newbery, of course, I won't need my job anymore. But I do like to have an imagination about it.
What advice do you have for young writers like us?
Oh, do you guys write?
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, 2 things. First of all, you should just go do it. I think a lot of people think about writing, but then don't actually pick up the pen or pick up the computer and put the words down because there are a lot of reasons. It seems big, it seems scary. It seems like, it's kind of a crazy way to make a living, and it is kind of a crazy way to make a living. But I hope that people who want to create do create, because there's no substitute for creating something brand new. The other thing that I like to tell young writers or old writers who are just beginning is there's this weird thing where first you make it and it feels magic because you've made something out of nothing, right? And then after a while, you keep writing and you keep reading, and it doesn't quite feel as magic anymore because you're starting to have this idea of what you want it to be, and it's not living up to that idea. It's what I want to tell people is that I call it the I suck phase, and I have spent a lot of time in it, and so has every other writer I know. That is actually really, really normal. That is very typical of a writer's experience, to feel like, I want to create something that looks like this, but in fact, it looks like this. What it is actually is a sign of progress. It's a sign that your taste is developing and your standards are clarifying, and what you want to create, you're getting a sharper vision of it in your head. And so it's a great thing, but it doesn't feel great. So just as you start to write, keep that in mind, right? That sometimes, like when you've got a picture in your head and you're not quite living up to it, that is every writer's experience ever in the whole history of the world. And the fact that you can feel the difference means that you have taste and talent. And the rest of it is just skill. The rest of it you can get there. Taste and talent is the thing that you're proving that you have.
Finally, it's time for our turbo 10.
Oh,
10
boy.
rapid fire questions. Are
Okay.
you ready?
Yes, fast. Try not to ramble, Erin. Let's go.
Number 1. What is your favorite phrase to use?
My favorite what?
Phrase to use.
Phrase to use. I like let out the breath she didn't know she was holding. I don't care if other people don't like it. I think it's great.
Number 2. What is one subject you'd love to learn more about?
Oh, there are so many, but right now I want to learn more about space travel.
Number 3. What is your go-to snack food?
Hot buttered popcorn.
Number 4. What was your favorite book growing up?
Lord of the Rings.
Number 5. If you could teleport somewhere right now, where would you go?
I want to go to the beach, but I also want to have new experiences. So let's go to Johannesburg, South Africa. I've never been.
Number 6. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
A normal superpower would be to fall asleep easily every time I get tired and put my head down on the pillow. That would be great. Otherwise, I need time-related powers to like stop time when I'm in a groove and like go, I'm in a groove and it is still 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I can be in the groove as long as I want.
Number 7. What was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
As a kid, I actually really liked Transformers.
Number 8. What is your favorite rainy day activity?
Reading books, of course.
Number 9. If you could have any 3 dinner guests, who would they be?
Do they have to be living people?
Nope.
No?
They can be cartoon.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, I can get fictional people too, huh?
Nope.
Oh, golly. All right, let's pick a classic like Shakespeare. Let's pick oh, this is so hard. I want to meet Marie Curie. She's one of my heroes. And oh, someone contemporary would be fun to like bring that kind of interesting perspective. Oh, you know who would be great? There's a podcaster named more or less behind the stats, cautionary tales, Tim Hartford. Just because if I ran out of things to say and I was just kind of standing and staring at people like, bleh, he would drive an interesting conversation.
Number 10. What is the best piece of advice you were ever given?
The best piece of advice I was ever given. Oh, I actually know. It's if it isn't working on the page, read it out loud. And if you can't get it onto the page, try reading it into a tape recorder and then typing. That has saved whole books of mine.
You were awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you so much for spending this time with us. We can't wait to read your future books.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. I wish you all the best with your channel.